Today at 5:30, the drug that could be game-changing in the fight against Alzheimer's. Scientists say trials show it can slow the progression of early-stage Alzheimer's, giving hope to millions.
This is so exciting because now we're getting results, the first results that are indicating that the drug is successfully treating the underlying cause.
We'll be answering your questions about when it's available and who might get it. Also on the programme, the late Queen's lady-in-waiting, Lady Susan Hussey, a member of the Buckingham Palace household for 60 years, resigns after repeatedly asking a black charity boss where she was really from at an event yesterday. Around 25,000 ambulance workers vote to strike in parts of England and Wales, possibly before Christmas, over pay and conditions. The day after the night before, England stretch out after their victory over Wales. Next up is Senegal.
On BBC London, bike thefts in the capital, almost 19,000 in 1 year, with hardly any bike thieves identified. Campaigners warn it's deterring people from cycling.
Good evening. For the first time, scientists have found a drug that slows the progression of early-stage Alzheimer's disease. It's called lecanemab, and it is being hailed as a breakthrough. It does have potential serious side effects, but scientists believe it may herald a new era of treatment, bringing hope to tens of millions of people around the world. Around 1 million people are thought to be living with dementia in the UK, and Alzheimer's affects about 60% of them. It gradually destroys key areas of the brain involved in memory and understanding. This new drug, which won't be available until it gains approval from medicine regulators, will bring hope to many. Here's our medical editor, Fergus Walsh.
Dementia is the most feared condition among older people. But Mavis Gwynn, who's 88, is enjoying her retirement, such as coffee mornings, despite a diagnosis of early-stage Alzheimer's.
I don't feel old. I don't feel tired particularly. We enjoy life together, and I've got family which I absolutely adore and enjoy them. Life, I think, is rather nice.
Have you got tea?
Mavis's short-term memory is badly affected, and she increasingly relies on her husband, Rodney.
What are you going to do with yourself today?
I have no idea.
Well, you're going up to have an infusion at the clinic.
Oh, thank you. That's excited. Come on, Rodney, let's get going.
Mavis is one of nearly 2,000 patients who took part in a pivotal trial of an experimental Alzheimer's treatment.
So I'm just going to show you the hippocampus, and that's where all our short-term memory is stored. And what you can see is that structure is very small and shrunken and replaced by fluid because of the disease.
Alzheimer's gradually destroys key areas of the brain involved in memory and understanding. The damage is driven by the build-up of a rogue protein called amyloid, which clumps around neurons in the brain. The new drug, lecanemab, binds to amyloid, which prompts immune cells to attack and clear it from the brain. In the trial, lecanemab slowed cognitive decline by about a quarter over 18 months.
Lecanemab is not a cure. It can only help patients in the early stages of Alzheimer's, but it is the first drug to convincingly slow cognitive decline. So that makes it a breakthrough against this relentless disease.
Doctors running the trial are delighted by the findings.
This is so exciting because now we're getting results, the first results that are indicating that the drug is successfully treating the underlying cause and is slowing down the symptoms of cognitive impairment and also the behavioural symptoms associated with Alzheimer's disease.
You're nice and warm.
Mavis may have been on a dummy or placebo drug during the trial, but is now definitely getting lecanemab. She receives an infusion every 2 weeks at this clinic in Surrey.
Now, I heard
Yes.
that you had a big coffee morning this morning.
Oh, did I?
Her Alzheimer's is still progressing, but her husband says it's not robbed her of her personality.
We don't want to just sit around and wait for the inevitable. which is why we applied for the trial. And we're now extremely pleased that we did so, because, you know, it appears to have had a very positive effect on Mavis.
Mavis had no side effects, but others on the trial did, including brain swelling and microbleeds. Lecanemab is far from being a perfect drug, but Alzheimer's researchers say it points the way to better treatments in future.
Fergus is with me. Very rare that we actually hear you use the word breakthrough. It's extraordinary what they're doing. People have a lot of questions, though. Who is this treatment going to be offered to?
So this is for patients who are in the early stages of Alzheimer's, who have the presence of this rogue protein amyloid in their brain. But at the moment, only about 1 or 2% of dementia patients have a confirmatory diagnosis using lumbar punctures or specialist scans to confirm that rogue protein. So if this drug is going to be widely available, we'll have to see a revolution in the way dementia care is provided.
How soon could it be available?
I spoke to the Japanese manufacturers this morning. They said they're filing for regulatory approval in the UK early next year. They hope the drug could be available as soon as September next year. But it's a big commitment. It involves an hour-long infusion every 2 weeks.
And what about the cost? How much could it cost?
It won't be cheap. Producing these monoclonal antibodies it's expensive, likely potentially to be tens of thousands of pounds per patient per year. It's not the ideal Alzheimer's drug, but for many who felt there's no hope, well, there is now some.
Our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, thank you. A long-standing member of the royal household, Lady Susan Hussey, has apologised and resigned after repeatedly asking a prominent black British charity boss, Ngozi Fulani, where she was really from during an event at Buckingham Palace yesterday. Lady Hussey, who is 83, was the late Queen's lady-in-waiting for 60 years and is godmother to William, the Prince of Wales. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
Buckingham Palace yesterday afternoon, a reception to highlight the issue of violence against women hosted by the Queen Consort. Standing next to Camilla here and with her back to the camera was Ngozi Fulani. She's chief executive of Sister Space and a prominent advocate for survivors of domestic abuse. Also at the reception was Lady Susan Hussey. On the left here, she was a lady-in-waiting to the late Queen Elizabeth for more than 60 years and is a senior member of the royal household. According to Miss Fulani, the following conversation took place between the two women. Lady Susan Hussey, where are you from? Miss Fulani, Sister Space. No, where do you come from? We're based in Hackney. No, what part of Africa are you from? I don't know. They didn't leave any records. Lady Hussey went on. No, but what nationality are you? I am born here and am British. No, but where do you really come from? Where do your people come from? My people, lady. What is this? Lady Hussey. Oh, I can see I'm going to have a challenge getting you to say where you're from. When did you first come here? Miss Fulani. Lady, I am a British national. My parents came here in the 50s. Oh, I knew we'd get there in the end. You're Caribbean. No, lady, I am of African heritage, Caribbean descent and British nationality. Another guest at the reception heard the exchange.
It made us feel like perhaps we're not welcome, perhaps we don't belong here. And you can be pretty sure that a white woman wouldn't have been on the receiving end of a line of questioning like that.
Buckingham Palace said it took the whole incident extremely seriously. It went on, in this instance, unacceptable and deeply regrettable comments have been made. The individual concerned would like to express her profound apologies for the hurt caused and has stepped aside from her honorary role with immediate effect. Lady Susan Hussey has worked at Buckingham Palace for much of her adult life. She's close to the royal family and is godmother to Prince William. For the palace, the episode is particularly problematic, given the Duchess of Sussex's allegations of racist attitudes within the palace.
And Nick is with me now. Problematic for the palace, as you say, particularly given the timing and what is happening next week in New York with Prince Harry and Meghan.
This would be wrong and unacceptable at any time, but it is, yes, particularly difficult for the palace given the context of Meghan, Duchess of Sussex's allegations about the racism that she says she encountered, that she spoke about in the Oprah Winfrey interview. Meghan and Harry next week are due to receive an award in the United States for having stood up to racism in the British royal family. Now, stepping right into this right now are Prince William and his wife. They've just arrived in Boston for the Earthwatch Awards, and straight away his spokesman has said racism has no place in our society. The comments were unacceptable, and it is right that the individual has stepped aside with immediate effect. Now, Lady Susan Hussey, 83 years old, more than 60 years of devoted service to the royal family. I think we can safely assume that she will be mortified at what is a very ill-judged blunder. From Ngozi Fulani this evening, she's spoken to the Independent newspaper, and she has accused the palace of institutional racism.
Nick Witchell, thank you. Around 25,000 ambulance workers are going to be called out to strike in England and Wales, increasing the threat of widespread industrial action in the NHS before Christmas. Paramedics, emergency care assistants, call handlers and other staff who are members of the GMB and Unison were responding to the government's 4% pay award. Our employment correspondent Zoe Conway reports.
Together in a show of strength, some of the biggest unions involved in industrial action, representing rail workers, college and university employees, postal workers and NHS staff. Joining picket lines soon will be paramedics and 999 call handlers. 25,000 ambulance workers who are members of the GMB and Unison have voted to strike across England and Wales in all of these 10 areas. They could walk out before Christmas.
For the last 10 years, ambulance calls have increased by over 70%, while the number of staff have increased by only 7%. Those figures are just unsustainable, and the pressure on ambulance workers and health workers has been building and building and building.
The Royal College of Nursing is also walking out over 2 days in December.
What do we want? 10%!
Hundreds of thousands of people have already been involved in strike action so far this year. Some people have compared all of this to the industrial action of the 1970s, the so-called Winter of Discontent. So how does it compare? Well, between June and September this year, 741,000 days were lost to strike action. You come to this figure if you add up all of the days each worker was on strike. No data was available during the pandemic, but you can see we're nearly at a decade-long high in terms of lost days. If we look at the number of days lost compared to the 1970s, well, this year's spike over here is tiny in comparison. In 1979, which is showed by this middle peak here, 29 million days were lost in strikes. Unison has admitted today it's disappointed that members at only 8 out of 250 NHS trusts voted to strike. But there are many more strike days looming this winter, and there'll be more union votes over industrial action in the new year. Zoe Conway, BBC News.
The Transport Secretary Mark Harper has been meeting 5 metro mayors from the north of England to discuss record numbers of train cancellations. Data shows that 1 in 26 services over the past year has been axed. The North of Tyne Mayor, Jamie Driscoll, joined the meeting on Zoom because he said the trains are too unreliable. Our transport correspondent Katie Austin has more.
It's been appalling, frankly.
Atrocious.
Unreliable.
I'd say absolutely dreadful.
Not very good recently.
I sometimes try not to use the train now for work.
That's a flavour of what passengers have told us recently about the state of train services in the north of England. For Jenna, getting from home in Chester to her job as a vet in Greater Manchester has become increasingly stressful. Yes. She says delays and cancellations regularly mean being late or having to pay for a taxi.
So what impact is this all having on you and your life?
I mean, everything. It's emotionally, it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting to constantly have to look at the train times every single day and hope, beyond hope, that I'm not going to be stranded anywhere. Financially, it's a lot because you're coming to work to make money and then you spend literally more than your day's wage on getting home and it's exhausting.
In the year up to the 12th of November, 3.8% of Britain's trains have been cancelled. That's the highest since these records began 8 years ago. Avanti West Coast had the highest proportion of cancellations at 8%. Govia Thameslink, which runs Southern, Thameslink, Great Northern and Gatwick Express, was second at 6.5%. Next, TransPennine at 5.8%. These stats don't include strike days nor advance cancellations, like those being made by TransPennine the day before. Train companies have apologised for disruption and say they're trying to improve. They say reasons include staff being off sick, a backlog of driver training and severe weather, plus other factors such as drivers not working overtime. The Transport Secretary came to Manchester today to meet mayors from across the north who have called on the government to intervene.
We need to modernise how the railway works so that we get a timetable, a better timetable that people can count on. That is the purpose of bringing people together, hammering out reform, getting the rail dispute sorted out, getting more drivers trained. That is what's going to deliver better services to passengers. That is the ultimate goal.
With a new timetable due on the 11th of December, passengers want to see a service they can rely on coming down the track. Well, the 5 mayors who took part in that meeting this afternoon described it as positive. They also said, though, that the time for warm words was over and passengers in the north of England were rightly demanding action now. Of course, passengers do face further disruption soon with the prospect of further national rail strikes in the run-up to Christmas. Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, has also met union leaders over the past week. But as things stand, those strikes are still set to go ahead.
Katie, thank you. The time is just after 5:45, our top story this evening. Scientists say trials of a new drug show it can slow the progression of early-stage Alzheimer's disease, giving hope to millions. And coming up, HSBC announces it will be closing more than 100 more of its banks across the UK.
And in London, the new technology being used by the Met to try to increase stalking convictions in the capital. Plus, how robots designed in London are entering the art world.
A woman is killed on average every 2 days in England and Wales. Where the suspect is known, 90% of the victims were killed by men. Now a group of bereaved families has joined together to campaign against male violence. They're asking for real action to deal with what they describe as a tidal wave of violence and a culture of gross negligence. More than 1.5 million women experienced domestic abuse last year, according to the latest figures. This evening, the Home Office said confronting domestic homicide is a key priority, and they're investing more than £230 million in tackling these crimes. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has been talking to some of the families who have lost loved ones.
I lost 2 people. One is my sister and one my niece.
She was my eldest sister, my absolute everything.
She was my aunt and she loved romantic movies.
This room is filled with loss, grief and anger, the real impact of violence against women.
Many of them could have been prevented, but it's the systems in place and the policies in place that are failing everybody, and we demand change.
The failure from the police and other sectors was outrageous, was horrendous. So it shows that there's lack of understanding of domestic abuse.
Noor's sister and niece failed by West Midlands Police dismissing their 999 calls.
She called them 4 or 5 times and they didn't come out, even though he was attacking her. So I don't know what it takes really for changes to happen. Is it more women to die?
Anjali has seen little change. Her aunt, Muntahina Ramanjat, strangled to death in 2011. A judge called her a silly woman when she said she feared her husband would kill her.
And nobody believed her. The police, children's services, doctors, school, everyone had nuggets of information. Nothing was shared.
From your experience, what do you think needs to change and improve?
But there's another angle to it, which my aunt really felt keenly, which was the racism that can also go hand in hand with misogyny, to downplay domestic violence even further than it was already downplayed.
Carol's daughter Ellie stabbed 13 times by her ex-boyfriend. Julie's daughter Poppy stabbed 49 times by hers. They believe sentencing is unfair, with less time if a knife is used in the home rather than the streets.
It's saying that the women who lose their lives in the homes with weapons that are often used from the kitchen, their lives are worth 10 years less.
It's insulting to the victims' lives. My daughter's life is worth 12.5 years to the criminal justice system.
The politicians just don't imagine that it could possibly happen to them. Well, it could. And if they, for 5 minutes, just actually really tried to get inside the pain that we feel constantly and think that could be my daughter lying there, then maybe, just maybe, they would begin to listen and change.
My sister, Gemma, was murdered by her husband. I really believe there should be a domestic abuse register, because I think from the first moment that you have been charged, you should have your name, you should be forced to put your name on that register, just like sex offenders do. The government are very keen about keeping streets safe, but actually it's not the streets that is the problem. The perpetrators are the ones who are roaming the streets, and they are the ones that need to be dealt with.
Chloe was just 9 when her mum Suzanne was killed by her abusive partner.
I think social services just need to do 10 times better. Like, there'd be times where they would call and pre-book when they'd be coming to visit. There was a time he moved a rug from the living room to my bedroom upstairs because there was blood stains on the floor. It's not how things should be done at all.
Aisha's cousin Jan, murdered by a convicted sex offender.
What's your message to the government, to the Prime Minister, about what you've been through collectively?
Listen and learn. Our voices are the most important. If you don't listen, you're not going to get nowhere.
Along with other families, their new campaign group, Killed Women, will demand changes to protect women. Too much violence, too many left without mothers, daughters and sisters. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
For details of organisations which offer advice and support for anyone who has been affected by these issues, you can contact BBC Action Line. That's at bbc.co.uk/Action Line. The bank HSBC is to close 114 branches across the UK from next April as part of modernisation plans. It says there's been a decline in the number of customers going into its premises, while the use of its digital app has almost tripled. Our business correspondent Caroline Davis is at one of the branches which will close in London. Caroline. Apologies, we don't seem to be able to hear Caroline at the moment. We maybe try and go back to her. But the world's largest active volcano in Hawaii continues to erupt. Mauna Loa began spewing molten lava on Sunday for the first time in almost 40 years. Fountains of lava are being fired up to 200 feet high into the air. 4 fissures have opened up on the volcano so far, and the lava flowing down the sides is not endangering any people or property, but emergency shelters have been set up in case that changes. Now we can go on to the World Cup football now. The World Cup today, there have been more upsets. The reigning champions, France, have been beaten by Tunisia, though France had already qualified for the knockout stage. And Australia beat Denmark, the semi-finalists at last year's Euros, 1-0. These were the scenes. Well, we can't show them to you right now, but I can tell you they were quite ecstatic when the winning goal went in. It was 3:30 in the morning and hundreds of fans had gathered in Federation Square in the city. Meanwhile, a peak TV audience of more than 17 million watched England beat Wales 3-0 last night in Qatar. Next, the Three Lions will play Senegal in their second round knockout game at 7 p.m. on Sunday. And then, if they win that match, they could face France. Our sports editor, Dan Rowan, reports from Doha.
Let the strap go enough to get your legs straight.
Having eased through to the next round, group winners England could afford to take things a little easier here in Doha today. A poolside stretch and recovery session at their luxury hotel earlier as the team wound down after a night to remember. has returned to the team with a poignant celebration.
Unfortunately, I lost one of my friends a couple of days ago. He's had quite a long battle with cancer, so it's you know, I'm pleased that I managed to score for him. He's always been a big supporter of mine, and yeah, he's just a great person. I'm pleased to have come into my life.
Yesterday was enough to see them progress. This how much it meant to the team's fans here in Doha and back home in Dakar. Well, Senegal have begun their preparations for the match against England here in Doha today. The two sides have never met in a competitive fixture, but the African champions have 10 members of their squad based in English football, and they could well provide Gareth Southgate's side with their sternest test to date here at the World Cup.
Up in the centre. Oh, and Bouba Diop is there.
Senegal now have a chance to match, or even better, their famous run to the quarter-finals 20 years ago. Their win over France, one of the tournament's biggest ever shocks. One of those following the fortunes of Senegal here told me their opponents would start as favourites.
We see every time the game of England. They have a big player and a good team. And we know that will be a very difficult game with Senegal. But you are better in attack than the defence.
But for Wales, the journey is over. Outclassed by England and out of a tournament they'd waited 64 years to be part of. Last night's match between the two home nations was watched by a peak UK audience of 18.7 million people, the biggest of the World Cup so far. Those numbers certain to increase if England can now extend their stay. Dan Rowan, BBC News, Doha.
Well, I'm afraid I can't show you those pictures of the volcano, but we can speak to Caroline Davis, who is outside an HSBC branch in London that is going to close. Carrie.
Sophie, in total, a quarter of the existing HSBC branches will be closed by the end of next year. This is just another sign of our changing face of our high streets as more people are banking online. Banks say they need fewer of these, and they say that during the course of the pandemic, that process accelerated as more people found ways of banking that didn't mean they had to do it in person. Now, according to the Consumer Group, which more than 5,000 banks and building societies closed branches, that number of branches, since January 2015. So this has been an ongoing trend. Now, while banks say that this is something that they need to do, we've also heard from groups like Which and also Unite the Union, which represents HSBC workers, who say that they are concerned that people will be left behind, particularly in rural areas that maybe don't have such strong broadband, or the elderly who maybe don't feel quite so confident using online services. They say those people need to be remembered, be able to get cash and be protected.
Caroline Davis, thank you. We can look at the weather now. Chris Fawkes is here. Chris.
Hi, Sophie. And just like yesterday, we had big contrast weather-wise across the country. We had some dense patches of fog. This particular Weather Watcher picture was sent to us from the Scottish Borders area, and this fog lingered all day. That really hammered the temperatures. Didn't get above freezing here at all, even during the course of the afternoon. Whereas some of the mildest weather was actually, again, across western portions of the UK. This was Cornwall, where we saw temperatures reach 12 degrees. Now, overnight tonight, I suspect fog is going to cause a few issues. Initially across eastern areas of Scotland, northeast England looking quite murky, and further southwards, Wales, the Midlands and southern areas of England likely to see some dense fog patches as well. No fog for Northern Ireland. Temperatures won't be low enough for it to form. But bear this in mind, I think tomorrow morning we could still have a few issues left over across parts of England and Wales, with visibility perhaps down to 100 metres or so, whereas the fog in Scotland will probably lift as this area of light patchy rain starts to work its way in. So a slow improvement here. Otherwise, I think many of you will have a dry day with some bright or sunny spells coming through eventually. Temperatures around 7 to 9 degrees across most of England and Wales. Again, the mildest weather towards the northwest of the country. Now, heading into Friday's weather picture, again, it's going to be a day where most of you will have dry weather all day. There'll be a few patches of rain, that said, across the far north of Scotland, but not really amounting to too much. And the temperatures still around 7 to 9 across England and Wales, 9 to 11 for Scotland and for Northern Ireland, with that milder weather across the northwest of the UK. The weekend, well, we're going to have stronger easterly winds blowing in. There'll be a lot of cloud, thick enough for a few patches of light rain or drizzle. But then we're talking about this chance of much colder weather next week. Well, we're still seeing an area of high pressure building Greenland, and what that does is it sends northerly winds down across the country. And so what's going to happen is temperatures for all of us will be going down. For many, there'll be some spells of sunshine around, but for some of our higher communities, and Aviemaw's up at around 300 or 400 metres high, well, you'll start to see some of the showers feeding in, turning to sleet or perhaps even a little bit of snow. We're still not sure about exactly how much is going to fall, but the trend is there for temperatures to be dropping across the board, so you will notice that change. It's going to feel a lot colder than it has done so far this autumn. So for some, the first sign of winter weather, and we could well see a little bit of snow, particularly over some of our high hills. That's how the weather's looking. Sophie.
No, Chris, thank you very much. That's it from the news at 5:30. Apologies if you were just tuning in for the BBC News at 6. We've been on a little earlier because of the football. Hugh Edwards will be here, though, at 10:15 this evening with all the latest news. And right now, the news continues here on BBC One. It's time to join our teams across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Goodbye.